Welcome. Today we welcome Heather Wright. Heather is an award-winning leadership, behaviour change and resilience trainer with over 2 decades of experience of helping people understand why they do what they do and how to do it differently. She makes neuroscience accessible, practical
Did his
and
brother and him
genuinely
come up this
fun.
weekend too?
Heather says, what if your anxiety, your
No.
stress, your stuck feeling isn't a
Yeah.
character
Let me
flaw?
pass. No, just kidding.
What if it's simply a habit you haven't learned to interrupt yet? Patterns can be changed, and today Heather will show you how. So, Heather, welcome and thank you so much for being with us. And I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Let's start by doing a quick sound check. Can everybody hear me? How's the volume? You all good? Giving me thumbs up? Fantastic. Stacey, we probably need you to pop yours on mute. Oh, you've done it. Well done. You were way ahead of me there because it kept popping up instead, which is fine. And little conversation with the dog or whatever it might be can sometimes be a bit distracting for us all, especially when the dog's jumping up at you. Okay, so yeah, I wonder how many of you have a habit that you'd quite like. I'm not going to ask you what it is, by the way. I'm not going to ask you what it is. But how many of you have a habit you would quite like to change? And it would make quite a big difference to you if you did. Give me a thumbs up or use the thummy uppy icon-y thing if you want. How many of you have? Yeah, we're going, yeah. It's funny, isn't it, saying I've got, yes, it's a thumbs up to say I've got a habit I want to change. Maybe I should have gone for thumbs down. Maybe that would have been more appropriate. Okay. Next question. How many of you have a process for changing a habit? And when by process, I mean literally a step-by-step process where we go, I've identified the habit, this is what I do, step 1, step 2, step 3. How many of you have a habit? You can either put an N or a Y in the chat, or give me a thumbs up or thumbs down on the screen. Do you have a process? Oh, Ashar, is that how you pronounce it? Ashar, she's got I've got a sort of from Emily, sort of, kind of. Bashar, tell us a little bit. Go on, you can unmute yourself for a moment if you have a moment and tell us what your process is, if you don't mind.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. My process is just that I give myself a wide berth. So I sort of give myself rather than a very specific thing that I have to do, I give myself a sort of a field within which I kind of begin to narrow.
So she gets squashed.
Yeah, it's a kind of, yeah. So I don't know if that's really a process. That's my process.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because when people, when I ask the question, let's say, I remember the first time I asked that question, I think it was in lockdown, probably in lockdown. And I had, as we all did in lockdown, I can't remember how many hundreds of people I had online, and tiny little pictures of people. And I asked the question and it was yeah or no in the chat. And it was like pretty much everyone, hundreds of people, yes, they had a habit. When I said, do you have a process? Less than 2% or 1% of people actually have a process. When I ask people what their process is, just in case if I ask them what their process is, we go into something like, some people put a picture on the fridge, some people go for replacing, which is fair enough. If anybody's read any of the Atomic Habits stuff by James Clear and stuff like that, but actually very few people, so that's quite annoying, isn't it? If you've got habits you'd like to change, but you don't have a process, how annoying is that? So I promise you, after this, I'm going to give you a 5-step process for changing a habit. And you might think to yourself, well, what's this got to do with stress? Okay, what's it got to do with stress? And the point is that stress is a lot of the time about habits we have. Okay, habits, because there's different types. Oh, I've got a little thing there. I have a variable process with different means to get to the goal, which may take 3 to 6 months. But you're right. It depends on what that habit is, doesn't it? Depends on how long you've had the habit for as well. Some people give up, for instance, they suddenly decide to stop smoking and they might have been smoking for 60 years. Well, it's going to take a bit longer than if you've only just took it up last week. But the point of what we're talking about here with regard to stress is the British Medical Dictionary's definition of stress. So when I was studying psychology, the British Medical Dictionary's definition of stress was this: when our perceived demands outweigh our perceived ability to cope. And that surprised me because at that point, I was doing biological psychology, so you do biological and you do neuropsychology and you do cognitive psychology, and there's many different sides. But I was at that point studying the module on the biological side, what's happening in our brain. And that British Medical Dictionary's definition seemed a bit odd to me. It's like when our perceived demands outweigh our perceived ability to cope. It wasn't like when people do this thing. So what it was kind of implying is that there's something going on in our head. And one of the things we forget when I talk about habits, okay, tell you what, in the chat, give me an example of a habit. It doesn't have to be a habit you have. Just give me an example of some habits that you have seen or witnessed or that we know of. And let's see what we've got there. Biting your nails. Thanks, Emily. Biting your nails. What else have we got? Maybe some habits. It can be good ones or bad ones, remember. Helpful or unhelpful. We've only got biting your nails. Oh, there we go. Scratch my head. Absolutely. Scratching an itch. Or if you've got hay fever, rubbing your eyes. Doesn't it? If anyone's got hay fever, rub it. Doesn't that first rub feel good? It's like, oh, that feels so good. And you've got to stop. And it's like, oh, it feels so good. Yeah. So smoking. Something's gone wrong. I have to rejoin. Okay, we promised to let you in, Isha. We don't want you to... Please let Isha in, Maggie, when she comes back in, okay? So notice this. All of these things, I can rarely get out of the house earlier when I intend to. Yeah, there's locking the doors. They're locking you in. That's the problem, Kat. So think about this. Habits are more than our physical habits, okay? We have at least 3 different types of habit. Shall I let her in? I've seen the admit. There we go. Okay. So when we look at our habits, there's 3 different types of habits. We've got our physical habits, which are all the things we just gave, but we also have emotional habits and we have thought processing habits. Particular things come up and sometimes we go over and over. I mean, I don't know about you. Every now and again, I get bored with some of my thought processing habits. You know, when you're overwhelmed by something and you just go over and over and over and you go, I'm so bored of my own head. She's like, I want to stick it in a big thing of water and wash out some of those thoughts. I just don't want to stop it. And that noise gets louder and louder. Our thought processing habits are probably more damaging if they're bad and more helpful if they're good than any of the other habits. Those are the habits that we really want to change. Yeah, biting the nails is a bad thing. Smoking is a bad thing. But the damage we do to ourselves, or indeed the boost we give to ourselves when we get our thought processing habits right, and it's about habits. So here's the good news, okay? The reason I talk about habits is because habits can be changed. Habits can be changed. Whereas if you see it as a character, either flaw or a piece of your character, we tend to think of it as a state of permanence. Okay. So for instance, we might say, I am an anxious person. Okay. And that might very well feel like the truth. And I'm, by the way, in no ways minimizing the devastation of being an anxious person could be. But if you change your language straight away to, I have developed over time a habit of anxiety, it instantly moves it from this is me, I can do nothing about it, to the potentially I could change that. I could learn how to change that habit. So it's a really important, words are so important. If you've ever been to any of the ISMA stuff, you'll know that words are absolutely vital. The story we tell ourselves in our head. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. And this morning I discovered that something's happened with my update. So when I share the screen, I unfortunately can't see your faces anymore, but you will be able to see the screen. So there we go. That's the screen. Let's do it. And yes, that is me. I am a martial artist, or was a martial artist for many, many years. Okay, and that's me doing a flying kick. I always think it's quite amusing when I'm talking about stress and stuff. There's a picture of me doing a flying kick. That must be quite stressful for the person on the receiving end. But here we go. Let's talk about it. So here's the point. We can strategize as much as we like. We can get a blueprint for what we want in our business, in our life, or whatever we like. We can get the fanciest pictures. But in actual fact, that future we want, our future habits, our future self, is not decided in blueprints. They're great. We should always have those. But actually, we are what we repeatedly do. So basically, our future, our resilience, our habits, okay, are not decided. They're practiced. And it's what do we practice? I don't know about you. I remember doing piano lessons when I was a kid, and oh God, my parents trying to get me to do the piano practice. It was all very well going to the lessons and being there with the teacher and doing chopsticks or whatever it was I was learning. But coming home, and she would recommend I did half an hour a day. Half an hour felt endless when I was 10 years old, you know. And of course, if you don't do the practice, you never get any better. We are what we repeatedly do. Yeah, Aristotle said that. Actually, how we handle this stuff is practiced in these different moments in our lives. So they're handled in meetings, how we handle conflict. Sometimes it's even in the stuff that's not seen, when nobody's around. I did some work, some sports psychology with some really famous golfers. And one particular golfer who didn't seem to get the hang of this. And what happened was he would get his thought processes right as soon as the game began. But when he was in the dressing room, when he was waiting to go on, when he wasn't playing golf, his thought processing habits were really poor. Really, really poor. So he would go over things. Oh, that time when I was in the rough, that time when I hit the sand, or whatever it would be. So our habits are practiced in the moments nobody sees, okay? And they're absolutely practiced when things are going wrong, when there's a downturn in everything, okay? Resilience isn't decided. It's practiced, and we have to practice it. Now, I don't know, has anybody heard of a guy called Nassim Taleb? Do you know what? I can't even see if you're putting hands up because I can't see you at the moment. It's really frustrating. But Nassim Taleb did some amazing work. I think he got a Nobel Prize for it or something like that. And he kept it, didn't give it away. He did this work on what he called becoming anti-fragile. And I don't know about you, there are times when I think that I'm really doing well, but it feels like my confidence can be a little bit fragile and anything could knock me off. You know, something happens and boom, all of a sudden my confidence goes. And it's like, no, we need to be anti-fragile. So what do we mean by anti-fragile? Well, this is what he said. He said, first of all, we start with fragile. We have something that is fragile, which means it is easily broken. It's also, but it's easily broken. Or then we move into what is robust, i.e. something that cannot be broken, that is solid. And I'm going to use the word robust again, okay? But what does he mean by anti-fragile? Anti-fragile, what Nassim Taleb talks about is, he said, this is actually when we get better because of the stuff that hits us, you know, the stuff that hits the fan. So not just not breaking, but actually it improving our strength. You know, absolutely improving it. And he used the example of, instead of being like a phoenix rising from the ashes, he referred to this as like being the Hydra. I don't know if any of you are into your Greek and Roman mythology, but with the Hydra, when you cut one of the heads off, more grew. So the Hydra became stronger. Now, the challenge, of course, with using that as a metaphor is the Hydra is pretty much known as a bad guy in the Marvel films or in the Greek tragedy and all of that kind of stuff. So it's really, you know, it's a weird metaphor to use, but from the Hydra's point of view, Hydra doesn't think it's a bad guy, so we're doing all right. Just going to have a look at what's in the chat there. Something coming up. Husband has a habit. Oh, what's that? Habit. I love that word. So I'll name and shame the husband. Okay. Is this similar to a growth mindset? Yes, it is. It is quite similar to a growth mindset. But often I don't think, even when we think about a growth mindset, and a growth mindset being the, well, I can't do this, I can't do it yet, and using that word yet instead, and actually seeing ourselves as things that grow, it is similar to that. But I often find when people think of a growth mindset, they really think about being robust rather than getting better and stronger. So yeah, however you want to view it, absolutely. So this is what's important, okay? It's really, really important that we think about it like this. What happens when we're under pressure? Squeezes the juice out of us, you know, and the question is, how does it work? So under pressure, we don't rise to the level of our intention, i.e. we intended to be great, okay? What happened is we fall to the level of what we've practiced, okay? Because when we're under pressure, a knee-jerk, you know that expression, our knee-jerk reaction, we need our knee-jerk reactions to be the positive ones instead of the, oh, no, I just went to my old bad habits. You know, and I don't know about you, I can think positively when everything's going brilliantly. The sun is out, everything's good. So can we keep that up when we're under pressure? So do we build the right habits? Do we build the right habits? So resilience isn't decided, it's practiced. So let's talk a little about the neuropsychology of this, okay? Because I really, really like the idea that this isn't just fluffy stuff. Let's prove it. It's really, really important to prove it. So let's talk about that. So brain and performance. So I have a question for you. It's not a test, just a question, all right? How many calories do you think the average individual uses over about an hour on an exercise bike? That maybe in the gym, or if you've got one at home. And I don't mean a Peloton. I don't mean like when you've got a teacher yelling at you. I mean, how many calories do you think you use up in about an hour? Let's have a look at the chat. Let's see what we've got. What are we getting here? We're having a few 500. Oh, some of you work a lot harder when you're on an exercise bike than me. I've noticed if you ever actually look at it when you're on an exercise bike, because I have a tendency to have my Kindle in front of me. So I'm like, I can almost hear that Mungo Jerry song, riding along on my pushback, honey, la, 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 la. So I'm doing it nice. Whereas I think Kat and Isha are absolutely pelting it. You're like imagining, yeah, I'm much more like the 200 or the 100 even. Occasionally I'll get off the bike and I'll think, was it worth it? Was it worth it? But those of you who work hard, you did well. So here's another question then. Let's follow that up. Let's give us more parameters. How many calories do you think a male, uses running a marathon? Let's say a 13-stone male, running a marathon in about 3.5 hours. So you got more parameters there. Male, 13 stone, marathon, 3.5 hours. How many calories do you think he uses? Da-ba-da-ba. Let's see. I'll tell you what, for those of you who are doing 500 on an exercise bike, this is going to be big numbers. So, okay, we've got 1,200, we've got 4,000. What else? It doesn't matter, by the way, just have a guess. Have a guess. 1,800, okay. 1,000, says Maggie. I bet Maggie, you and I were on the same sort of boat when we were. Can you be on a boat when you're on an exercise bike? You don't mix your metaphors, Heather. Don't mix your metaphors. Got 800 there. Okay, so according to research, a man, we've got 3,000 there. A 13-stone man in 3.5 hours uses approximately 3,500 calories. Okay. So I think that when I run and I run slower, I use more. So it's better for me to run slower. What do you think? I don't know if that works. So next question then, Tour de France cyclist. How many calories on average does a Tour de France cyclist use on the day of the Tour de France? So 1st of July, the tour will be starting again with gusto somewhere around the French area. What do you think? 7,500, says Joanne. Those guys are skinny. 5,500. I know I'm going on average here, so we know a mountain stage is going to be different from a flat stage. Was that 21,000? Wow. 5,000, 6,000. Okay. Okay, for those of you in the 6,000 to 7,000 mark, yep, you're kind of around there. Okay, so they have to recoup all of that. It's quite hard when you're on a bike to make sure you're getting the same input as you use. So here's the big question. How many calories do you think a chess grandmaster uses on the day of a major tournament? Ooh, we've changed it now. A chess grandmaster, day of a major tournament, how many calories? Excuse me, some water. 12,000. Wow, that's a lot. Excuse me, I've got a bit of a tickle. 900, 500. Any more guesses? Any more guesses? Let's see what we've got. Any more guesses? 900 was our last bid. What am I bid for this question? Okay. According to research, a chess grandmaster on the day of a major tournament uses around 6,000 to 7,000 calories, around about the same as a Tour de France cyclist on the day of the Tour de France, according to research. So here's the next question. Why do you think that is? Because they're not cycling up any hills. They're not pedaling. I don't know how long they last, but it probably doesn't last as long as a stage on the Tour de France. Why do you think it is? Go on, type. Thinking energy, says Joanne. Thinking energy. Constant, intensive thinking. Absolutely. Absolutely right. The brain uses more energy. Absolutely, Maggie. The brain uses more energy than any other organ in the body. That's why babies have that growth spurt and they're thinking all of the time and they're learning new stuff. And so they have to sleep a lot. They have to rest their brain. Okay. And the brain was created, I don't know whether to say that, the brain evolved at a time when we didn't have sugar in everything. So what's happened is the brain is learning to save energy. If the brain used that much energy all of the time, we would struggle to get enough, to kill enough woolly mammoths, if you like, to get enough energy and enough calories into our system. So what does the brain do? The brain lays down habits. Because you were right when you said intensive thinking. I don't know about you, if I'm driving a particular way, and I've done it loads and loads of times, there's times when I almost forget to turn off the road, because this is the habit. Oh, and I wasn't going there today. I was going somewhere different. You know, it's a bit like when you move house and you find yourself driving to your old house. Because the brain lays down habits in order to save energy, because it cannot handle that much intensive energy usage. So it lays down habits. So let's talk about the neurons then. Neurons and connections. And we'll do this very, very quickly, because I am not an expert on this, I'm not a brain surgeon, okay? However, I do speak to them a lot and I get this stuff. So this is going to be a model, okay? So we've got a million neurons in our head. We got a million of those blooming things, and each one talks to other neurons. And in that conversation, if you like, each neuron can connect with over 10,000 other neurons in a single instant. Over 10,000 in a single instant, creating those connections, okay? In its lifetime, each neuron can connect with 10 to the power of 28, 1 followed by 28 noughts. Anybody any good at maths? Any guesses, therefore, if each neuron could connect with 10 to the power of 28 in its lifetime, and you've got a million neurons, how many potential connections are there in the brain? Imagine getting that on your maths paper. Any of you got any children going through maths GCSE at the moment? Imagine if they turned over the paper and went, what? What's that? Have a guess. Usually people go things like a lot, shed loads. Absolutely. Now, there is a guy who worked this out, okay? A guy called Anokin, who was one of Pavlov's students. Too much, absolutely. This is why you get so tired sometimes, when you get a new job or you're doing something different, taking up a new hobby, okay? But this guy, Anokin, did some research, okay? And he said that the amount of connections in the brain, if written out, is 1 followed by 10.5 million kilometers of noughts at normal font size, before anyone says how big are the noughts, okay? That's the potential of the brain. Now, we're not using that many, but that's how many it could make, okay? So that growth mindset we were talking about before, just know how much that potential there is in there, okay? So absolutely amazing. The idea of suddenly saying, well, I'm no good at spelling, when we've got all this part of the brain that we really could be developing. Just a quick side note on this, by the way. What I am not saying is that we use a tiny percent of the brain. I'm saying we're using a tiny percent of the potential number of connections in the brain, i.e., when we make these connections, we actually create more substance of the brain. Okay, because what happens? Let's talk about what happens in the brain. Here we go. So each neuron, when it talks to another neuron, imagine that's a neuron. It doesn't look like a neuron. They look like the bit on the picture on the other side. Each neuron talks down to another neuron. It lays down a load of neurochemicals and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm calling it stuff because we're not doing brain surgery. You'll love this. I do a lot of work with doctors, you can imagine. In hospitals, I start by going, who knows a load of stuff about the brain? And a load of hands go up. Oh, blooming heck. We're going to use the easy stuff here, okay? It lays down a load of stuff. It lays down proteins and minerals and, let's say, neurochemicals. When the electricity, because this is all about electricity traveling from point A to point B in the brain. When it goes that way again, it lays down more stuff. And when it goes that way again, it lays down even more stuff. It's a very simple diagram. What's happening to our connection? What's happening to our connection? Any guesses? Type it in, become a keyboard warrior. I'm looking at the chat. I can't see your faces, but I can see the chat. Any thoughts? What's happening? Getting thicker, better, well-worn path. I like the word better. It's becoming a habit. Absolutely. The network grows. So it's actually getting faster. It's getting smoother. Okay, so what reinforces those particular paths? Absolutely, it reinforces those particular paths. So when the first time you go down that pathway, there's a load of electromagnetic resistance, and it has to push its way through those, which is one of the reasons why it requires more calories. Okay, lots of intensive thought process here. Okay, so it's creating those pathways in the brain until eventually they become smoother. They actually, according to my PhD brain expert, okay, according to her, okay, that becomes stickier. Okay, no, greasier. Sorry, greasier was the word I needed there. Greasier, so it goes faster and faster and faster. Okay, and electricity, as we know, travels down the path of least resistance. Okay, we call these dendrites, by the way. If you're not a brain surgeon, we are safe to call these things dendrites. Dendrites are the manifestation of the stuff that's going on in our head. Okay, here's the important point. They grow, and when we don't use them, they shrink, just like a muscle. If you break your arm and your arm goes into plaster for a while, we know we have to have physiotherapy to build that muscle up and build those tendons and ligaments up and do that. It's exactly the same in the brain, okay? They grow and they shrink with use and disuse. Why is that important? The growing and the shrinking, why is that important with regard to the stuff we're talking about here? Why is that important? Joe's fastest finger first thing going on. Why is that important? Because we have to consciously practice. Absolutely. We have to consciously practice the ones we want to keep. And why else? Here's the exciting bit. Why else? So that we can change. Okay. We can reinforce or remove a habit. Absolutely. That's the really good news. You know that old, you can't teach an old dog new tricks kind of expression. It's not true. It is harder. We've got to admit that. It is harder. Okay, and the reason it's harder is because the brain becomes less what they call plastic. The plasticity of the brain gets a little bit less as we get older. Okay, but we've also created loads more. But it's not impossible. While we're young, obviously, there's loads of stuff. Think about all the stuff that you might like to change. Okay, and what you can do with that. Okay, so they grow and they shrink here. Okay, so it's really, really important. So these dendrites, they go along, and here's the point here. If you create, so imagine that they don't go in a straight line like this. We'll assume this is like a Roman road, but it's not. They're all kind of more like spaghetti. Okay, when the electricity gets, I don't know if you can see my cursor, when the electricity gets to a particular point and it's got a, for want of a better word, a choice of two pathways, unless we consciously choose, intentionally choose to force it to travel down one particular pathway, it will travel down the path of least resistance, because we know that electricity travels down the path of least resistance. So it'll continue to reinforce the old habit unless we consciously choose. And when we consciously choose, and we consciously choose to reinforce that new habit, when that one gets bigger than the other one, that is when it becomes easy. So if you can remember changing some sort of a habit, and at first it was really challenging, there was a particular point where all of a sudden it became easier. And that's the point where the new pathway becomes wider, smoother, faster than the old habit. And then the old habit starts to shrink. By the way, it very rarely goes away. These things stay there unless there's an issue with the brain, maybe dementia or something like that. These start to crumble a little bit with that regard to that. Okay. It's also one of the reasons, and I'm no expert in dementia, why newer habits are harder to form, because they're more easy to crumble. You know, great long-term memory, poor short-term memory, because they've not been built. Okay, so we've got those paths of least resistance coming up there. And what we want to do is we want to build the new one with determination. Okay, so just to reinforce, the electricity must travel down the path of least resistance. Really, really important. It's the law of physics. Okay, so all of our physical reactions start with a thought. All of our physical reactions start with thought, except the unconscious ones. Okay, you've got some that are unconscious, your heart beating, you know, knee-jerk reaction, as we might call it, those things, although you can override, this is the amazing thing, you can override those. I'm not suggesting you should override your heart beating, but if anybody has ever seen documentaries on people who do what they call free diving, they lower their heart rate. They lower the heart rate right down, and they lower the instinct to breathe. Now, I'm not, by the way, suggesting we should do that. It's an incredibly dangerous sport, incredibly dangerous, okay? But all I'm doing is using it as an example of, with enough intention, we can even override the things that are unconscious, that are just happening by instinct, okay? So all of our physical reactions start with a thought, okay? And our brain controls our emotional reactions, and all of our emotional reactions start with a thought. So everything we think leads to a chemical release into the body. A chemical release from somewhere in the body, a lot of it from the brain, but from other organs in the body, releases those chemicals, starting with a thought. And of course, those thoughts start off quite conscious, but eventually when that gets thicker, they almost become unconscious. So we have to be reinforcing the ones we want. Yeah, does this make sense? So any questions at this point, before I keep going? Any questions so far? How are we doing? I'm going to unshare so that I can see faces just for a moment. Going to unshare. Hello, I can see you again. How are we doing? Is it making sense? Yeah, I'm getting some thumbs up. Brilliant. Yes, because we can shrink the ones. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just having a quick look. Thank you very much. I'm scrolling along the pictures, getting some thumbs up. Brilliant. Okay. So let's get back. I'm going to have to share again and you're all going to disappear off my screen. Most annoying. You know when they update, when your computer updates and it mucks around with your settings? That seems to be what's happened for me at this point. Where are we? Share on that one. Okay. So we've got the thinker there, the thinker. Let's move on. Okay. So we've got over 300 different chemicals, that are released because of what's going on in our head at that moment. Okay, some of them are fight or flight, some of them are tend and befriend, but some of them are stuff that we have created. Anything that you didn't do when you were first born is learned. Okay, and we can go into where you learned it, whether you learned it by watching your parents or your family around you, or whether you just learned it because of experience. You know, you went near a dog and it got aggressive and scared you, or whether or not you've chosen to build those, just as practicing the piano, a deliberate and conscious piece of practice, you know. And nowadays, I'm really, really pleased that more and more schools are teaching children about growth mindset and teaching them about how they can be in control of the way they react, okay? But we don't get in control of the way we react necessarily after the fact. What we have to do is preload ourselves so that that reaction when under pressure becomes the one that we would like, yeah? So it's not a secondary reaction. If we're feeling angry, it's because we're thinking angry. If we're suffering from road rage when somebody cuts us up, it's because when somebody cuts us up, we're going, yeah. Oh, here, by the way, I'll give this one to you for free. Here we go. This is my thought. Somebody cuts me up. Interesting maneuver. Slightly sarcastic, but it stops me getting mad. Try that one for anyone who gets a bit angry. Thinking angry, feeling angry. If we want to feel happy, and this is going to sound really Disney, okay? If you want to feel happier more often, what do we have to do? Just look in the chat. Go on, be Disney. Be Disney. If we want to be happier more often, what does Peter Pan say? Are you all too young to remember Peter Pan? Smile, believe it. What does Peter Pan say? Think of a happiest thought, any happy little thought. Okay, it sounds really naff and really Disney-like, but what it's really doing when we understand what's happening in our brain is we're reinforcing the thought process, yes? Thinking happy, consciously thinking, and it's not just going for inane, I'm so happy, because if you start saying, I'm so happy, I don't know about you, but my brain will suddenly pick up with liar, pants on fire, you're really feeling really irritated. Okay, so I ask myself questions. How could I make myself happier? How could I ask in questions? Here's one of our how-tos before I get into our process. Here's one of our how-tos. Here we go. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about this, okay? The intensity with which you think something times the frequency with which you think it gives you dendrite construction. The intensity with which you think it times the frequency with which you think it gives us dendrite construction. Let me explain why that is. Those over 300 different neuropeptides and neurochemicals are not only the things that are released when we feel a strong emotion or any emotion, they are also the chemicals that reinforce the dendrites. Therefore, the intensity of thought plus the frequency of thought creates big dendrites. Here's something for you to think about right now. Can you remember a time when you were not frightened of something, you're not frightened, and then you had one experience, one very intense experience, and it seemed to override all of the positive experiences you had? Why? Because the positive experiences were not as intense. So imagine you've had a bit of a bump in your car. I don't want to take anyone back to any horrible times, but you had a bit of a bump in your car. It's not just the intensity of the actual, oh, my word, I nearly hit the curb, or I was just hit by another car. But how many times we go over it in our head? How many times we go, oh, I could have died. I don't know if I've got a friend who's really dramatic. Any of you got friends like that? Really dramatic. No matter what happens to her, it's a disaster. It's never an average sort of experience. It's a disaster. So, she went over on holiday somewhere and hit an animal. It was very sad. And I said, what happened? She went, I nearly died. Actually, what happened was she dented the car. She didn't nearly die. The poor animal, that nearly died. Apparently it was okay in the end. But, wow, how many of us do that to ourselves? We need to curb that. So what we have to do is we have to get used to the idea of establishing routines for our dendrite building. Okay, routines for our dendrite building. So in the morning, we all have routines. Type in the chat what your morning routine entails, please. That you think you can share with us. Just going to say that you think you can share with us. What does your morning routine entail? I'm waiting while you type it in. Oh, first coffee looking out the window. I hope you've got a nice thing to look at, Isha. Lots of fluids and porridge. Having a porridge, that's great. I don't know why I decided to be Scottish at that point. Sorry about that. Well, we all know why I did. Stereotypical. Lots of fluids and porridge. Get up and walk the dog. Try to take 5 deep breaths and stretch. Shower, wake up. Kids, look at this. Make packed lunch. This is a very full morning, Emily. Make packed lunches, walk the dog, enjoy the woods, have breakfast and start up laptop. Probably all before 4 a.m, I'm imagining, Emily. Sorry, I had to go. Okay, you're back though now. Make my bed. Aha. Have you... Was your make your bed part of that 5-minute routine that in that YouTube speech when he talks about first make your bed? Love having your morning coffee in silence. Fantastic. So those morning routines are really important. In there, I can see that many of you, and it's probably why you've joined this because you're into this, but you really get this, that our morning routines are really, really important. But it's our thought process routines to build the dendrites, to build those dendrites from early on so that when we're under pressure, we resort to those habits. Yeah. So remember what we said. Resilience isn't decided, it's practiced. So too much as cat. Yeah, mornings can be like that. So we have that routine. I had a car crash. This is, by the way, not a picture of my car. And the reason it's not a picture of my car is because when I had a car crash, quite a few years ago now, I wrote my car off. I aquaplaned. I hit water. I was going along the motorway. I aquaplaned, car spun round, smashed into the barrier. Not a good thing. But here's the point. When I got out of my car, I chose deliberately not to look at it. I looked in the other direction. I'm sure you can guess why. I did not want that picture in my head. The next thing I did was take total control of the way I was thinking. So there were 3 things that went through my head. The first 2 were knee-jerk reactions, or rather car crash reactions. Okay. First one was, inconvenient. I was going to be late and I don't like being late. Second thought was, that's going to be expensive. So maybe that tells you what my priorities are in life. Okay. But my third one was absolute and very deliberate. And it was this: invincible. Because I got out of the car, the airbags had gone off. Okay. And they were lovely and soft. And I didn't even have, I had nothing wrong with me. Now I could have gone, oh my, I nearly died. But I kept reinforcing. I went into that routine, and every time, and there were my particular friend who's very dramatic, I chose not to tell her about that. Now, funnily enough, I had just left her and was driving away. It was a couple of hours after I'd left her. I was on my way to deliver some training at a place. Okay. And it was very dramatic. It was very tempting to get onto, Facebook or WhatsApp and all of that and go, oh my word, I just had it, because it's a dramatic story, right? We love a dramatic story. I chose not to do that because I knew that their thought process would start to infiltrate mine. Oh no, are you okay? Are you okay? So I was very careful with who I spoke to about it, especially in the moments just after something that's very emotional, because you're very vulnerable at that point. Your body is busy working out what it should be doing. Your body is working out how it's going to cope with this drama. Okay. So any questions so far? Type them in the chat, because I'm now going to give you the process for change. Okay, I'm now going to give you the process. But before we do, I just need to make sure I'm going to unshare for just a moment. Have a quick look at your lovely faces. How are we doing? Any questions? We're doing well. Any questions? Wave a hand at me or something. Yes, Kat. Unmute and chat.
Hi. Yeah, thanks.
Hi.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, no, some great ideas. The thing I was thinking was, in that moment, your nervous system is really firing off in whatever moment it is, but particularly a car crash or something very traumatic, or whatever, the trauma means to different people, and proportionately and all that. But so I imagine you might have to do some kind of regulatory thing so that your brain, all the parts that can think in a more open way, come back online, if you like. So, because I was just thinking it's quite hard to just switch that thinking part on when you're all, you might be shaking massively and you might not be breathing properly, all that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So yeah, this is where we want the physical and the mental habits to merge, isn't it? So we know what's going on, and there is a point in there. So yes, I was certainly shaking, and there were certain things that I couldn't control because my nervous system was naturally doing what it will do. But what I didn't want to do was make it worse. Yeah. And that's the challenge. So it was absolutely pouring with rain. As I said, I was aquaplaning. I stood on the side of the road and I got my breathing under control. Absolutely right. But I chose not to do the drama thing. Like, I chose not to look at the car. I chose not to, because I knew that, at least, funnily enough, I think that probably only one side of the car was all mangled, but it would probably have been the side that was facing me. So it's like, oh, I didn't need that. The guy who stopped behind me, who called the police and got the car picked up and everything else, started to describe the car to me and started to get quite dramatic with me. And I just went, can we just stop that? Because that's just going to make things worse for me. So it was more kind of controlling it, but not suppressing it. And you're absolutely right. There's certain things we have to do, but there's certain things we sometimes add to make it worse, because for the sake of the story, etc. And also because we're feeling bad, it's natural to do more bad stuff to ourselves. I'm shaking, therefore I'm feeling bad, versus I'm shaking, I just need to get myself physically in the right place. But then also so here's the thing I did also, was I put it to music in my head. Whenever I think about that car crash, I put it to music. So because music is such a powerful emotional trigger for the brain. Okay. So whenever I think about the spinning of the car, I have a waltz going on in my head. Da, 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 da. Film writers, film producers know that music creates impact in all films. And we think in video footage. We don't think in words. There's a tiny percentage of the world, less than 1% of the world has a thing called aphantasia, where they don't think in pictures. The rest of us all think in video footage. So if you put it to music, it can change the emotion. Yeah, so I put it to waltz, which is relaxing. And then later on, when they gave me another car, while I got a new one, they gave me a tiny little Fiat 500, which, when you're feeling a little bit nervous about driving, a Fiat 500 does not feel particularly stable. So I'm driving along the motorway in this little Fiat 500, and every time I go past a lorry, it's kind of pushing me over the side. And I'm still fresh out of this thing. I'm real. So I started to put that to music. So does anybody know the Benny Hill music? Some of you don't. Benny Hill used to do highly inappropriate stuff, but he always speeded it up and had this music, which was comedy music. So whenever I was in that Fiat 500 until I changed my car back, I was there thinking in comedy music. This is really quite funny. And gradually was able to sort it out. So you're right. There's certain things we have to do, certain things we accept, but the idea is to stack the deck in our favour for making it better. And there's also things we learn. So for instance, we learn from that. I learned, for instance, not to put your foot on a brake when you're aquaplaning. I think that's quite an important thing to learn at that point, you know. So I learned the good stuff, but didn't make it worse. And it's the same kind of thing. Now, a lot of things aren't as dramatic as a car accident. A lot of the stuff we get overwhelmed with are a presentation in front of people we're nervous about and stuff like that. That's not a car crash unless we make it into one. So good question, Kat. Thanks very much. Brilliant. Okay, let me give you, so once having explained all of that, here's the process, and the process becomes easier now we understand why. So this is, I'm just going to check, I've just seen something in the thing. So it may be said, in choosing your thoughts, response may have lessened or decreased physical reactions. Absolutely. And I did speak to an expert, by the way, because I do think that would be a good time to sort out and speak to somebody who can help you with what's going on in your head. So I spoke to somebody and they said, right, this is okay, but this is not. Don't suppress this, but do that. And it was just about making it right. And I did that the day after. Luckily, the company I was going to do some work with had an on-site therapist and on-site doctor who came to see me. They insisted that they came to see me, having heard that there I am. I think I was delivering, I think I might be delivering something we would refer to as a positive attitude course. And there I am shaking. And I had to explain, because of course your body doesn't stop shaking for quite a while. Going, I'm okay, everybody, but I'm just a little shaky. Oops. Have to get that right. Okay, so let's talk about habit loops really quickly. Doesn't take long to do this, but it's really important. I'm going to give you 5 steps. So this is a habit loop. In the brain, we have a cue, leads to the habit. The habit leads to a reward. Because of that reward, next time the cue happens, our brain, just like a puppy, goes, ooh, I got a reward. Okay, so this is our process. Step 1, okay? Step 1 in the process. This is the easy bit. We identify the habit that is unhelpful and we define a habit that is more helpful. Only you can do that, okay? This bit's quite easy. I wish I didn't keep doing that. I wish that instead, okay? In business, we usually get a workshop party together to say, all right, we want people to collaborate more. We want them to stop working in silos. Right, okay, what does that look like? And we spend time defining it. We put it on little posters and all of that kind of stuff. We're very, very good at this bit. We tend to think that that's the end of it though. No, that's not the end of it. Just the knowledge is not enough, okay? So that's step 1. This is the hard part, okay? Step 2, okay? Step 2, we have to work out what the psychological reward is, because most of our rewards are psychological. They're not physiological. Yes, when we eat chocolate, we get a burst of sugar, but actually there's a lot more to it than that. So what we have to do is we have to play with the reward. Now, here's the definition of a reward. A reward moves you away from pain or towards pleasure. That's the way the brain works. It's moving you away from pain avoidance, or towards pleasure. Now, often our habits do both. They'll move us away from pain and towards pleasure. Okay. And what we have to do, and this is where you have to know yourself a little bit. What is that about? So let's say you've got, this is a really weird habit. Let's imagine you're very defensive. When somebody criticizes you, you become defensive and uptight and a little bit overwhelmed. Yeah. And so you snap back or you disappear inside yourself going, oh no, they don't like me anymore. Okay. What's the reward? What's happening in that? Well, that defensiveness is stopping us from maybe looking a fool in ourselves. Maybe at some point in our lives when we were at school, that defensiveness went, oh, I'm not going to do that again. Avoidant behavior, by the way, is the most negative of our behaviors that happens. We just avoid doing it. We don't apply for jobs because we might be humiliated by applying and not getting it. We don't take certain exams, or we don't take up a new hobby. But as a martial artist, I've done a lot of teaching children the martial arts. And sometimes when you're doing what might be a complex maneuver, I remember seeing these 2 little girls. We were doing flying kicks because it's fun. They're of no use whatsoever in a fight. But we were doing a flying kick because the kids like it on crash mats in a big gym. And these 2 little girls about age of 8 who'd been coming for quite a while, about 2 or 3 years, went and sat down straight away. And I went over and said, why are you sitting down? They went, oh, yeah, we can't do flying kicks. We're no good at them. I go, well, hang on a minute. That's why you're at the lesson, to learn how. Oh, we don't want to. Even at the age of 8, avoiding looking silly. Avoiding looking silly. They weren't going to hurt themselves. There were crash mats around. Avoiding looking silly. So we avoid that. Okay, so that's the point where we need to work on. Okay, so when I was working with some engineers a little while ago on collaboration, the boss called me in to say, Heather, we need you to come and motivate these people. Motivate them. These are engineers. They need to collaborate. They're working in silos. And I had a conversation with him and said, by the way, I don't think the issue is motivation. I think they would like to collaborate. I think the problem is they don't know how to change a habit of many, many years. So I'm in the room with 70 engineers. We're talking about this and I get to this point and I say, right, what's the reward for not collaborating? What's the reward for working in silos? And they went, well, there's none, because they spent ages defining that they would like to collaborate and collaboration's great. Hey, they'd even got the hat and the t-shirt. We love collaborating. What's the reward? And after a little while in groups, they started going, well, actually, it's quicker not to collaborate. I don't have to share my ideas with anybody else who might, poo-poo my ideas. I don't have to have my ideas destroyed. I don't have anybody changing my thought process. I don't have to talk to the idiots in the other room because nobody likes them. There were loads of rewards, okay? So what we do is we play with the rewards and we say, what could the reward be for the new habit that will override the strong emotional reward that I'm currently getting for the unhelpful habit? This is the bit that takes the time, and you have to play with it because, unfortunately, we are wired to get very strong emotions when we have unhelpful habits. And that reinforce. So we have to really work on this one. Okay. Really, really work on this one. So that's the reward. Here's the next thing. And this is the good news, the cue. Okay. What we want to do is isolate the cue, the moment. Some people call it a trigger. I try to avoid using the word trigger because the word trigger is now associated with all bad stuff. Oh, I was triggered. Okay. We're always triggered. We're always cued. We're triggered for good stuff. I'm hungry, therefore I'll eat. Yeah. But here's the thing. You don't need 24 hours of emotional strength. You need the emotional strength at the moment of cue. And here are the 5 different cues that have been found. Okay, so location. I don't know about you, when I get in my car, there's a particular cue. And when I'm driving, I like to have a can of a fizzy drink next to me. Okay, but that's not good for me anymore. So now I'm going for, if I want a can, what I want is something that's not sugar related. Okay, but it's the location. I can go an entire day without having a fizzy drink, but when I get in the car, I suddenly go, ooh, okay. Location, time of day. It can be general time or it can be at 3 o'clock. Most of us will talk about having to have 3 meals a day. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't, but a lot of that's about habit. I get people who go, oh no, I get terrible if I don't have my lunch at this time. Well, funnily enough, often that's not necessarily, sometimes it's not necessarily physiological, it's more habit. Okay, so time, emotional state or senses. So I'm a beekeeper as well, by the way. I do beekeeping. And when I first started beekeeping, a couple of the bees got inside my suit. Now the beekeeping suit is really just meant for the beekeeper. The bees are not supposed to be on the inside, as much as we might call it a bee suit. They're supposed to be on the outside. Well, a couple of them got on the inside and stung me on the face, and my face swelled and it was unpleasant. And I made that mistake 2 weeks running. I know, I'm sorry. I was a beginner. I was a bit dumb. I made the mistake 2 weeks running. And I got a sting there. And I got a sting there. And for a year, the sound of the bees around me made me fearful. Okay. And so what I did was I had to eliminate the cue. So I started wearing earbuds when I was doing my hive inspections because I couldn't hear the bees, and I gradually eliminated the sound of the bees. And now I'm fine. That dendrite has shrunk. Okay. Every now and again they get a little bit loud, but fair enough. So emotional state, other people, as you say, and you'll see that immediately preceding action, a bit like sending a text and pressing send really quickly, and then sometimes going, oh, I wasn't going to send that yet, or I was going to check an email. I was going to check the spelling. Okay. So we need that cue. When's that cue? Then we generate a plan, and a plan looks like this. For the next week or whatever, when this cue happens, I will do this instead of the old habit. I'll do new habit instead of old habit. I call that the sliding doors moment, for any of you who have seen the film Sliding Doors. In the film Sliding Doors, Gwyneth Paltrow, right at the beginning, having lost her job, is going down the tube stairs, and the tube train comes in, and the doors open, and a child gets in her way. And at that moment, I'm not going to spoil this for anybody, but at that moment, the film splits into 2 different timelines. One where she manages to get through the sliding doors, and one where she's stopped. And that 3-minute delay changes her life completely. And she has two different, one where she did and one where she didn't. It's a great film, really good film, 1990s, for those of you who are kind of too young to remember, okay? So we generate a plan, the sliding doors plan, at that moment of cue. And here's the thing, we have to drill the skill. It's about practice. It's about practice. So we have to then do it for a particular length of time. So that's the process. That's the process. There's some bonus material on this QR code if you fancy getting some bonus material of extra stuff. I can't believe that we are at 1 minute to finish. So I'll just check if there are any questions, any more questions in the chat or any comments on what we've covered. Yeah, I understand. Meeting starts at 3 and it's 1 minute to go. Glad you really enjoyed it. It's okay. It is literally the last few minutes, Emily. You with your busy mornings. Any other questions? That QR code is there if you want it. I'm going to stop sharing, so get it now. I'm hoping it wasn't too fuzzy. If not, let me know, or let Carol know, or Maggie know, and I'll come back to seeing you. So how are we doing? How was that? Has that given you some thought processes, something to add to the stuff you already know? I'd be QR code. What's that? What's that, Joanne? Take to Future Together conference. Oh, right. Yeah, don't worry. It's the same thing. So don't worry. That was, it's the same bonus material as I did for the Future Together conference. So still go into it. Shouldn't have labeled it like that. Great as a coaching tool. Yes, it is. Generated thought session. Thank you. Brilliant, Maggie. Thank you very much.